Hi, friends. Today I'm here for another interview to discuss some of the themes in my newly released book, Chronic Hope: Raising a Child with Chronic Illness with Grace, Courage, and Love. And if you've missed any of these videos, you can catch up with them on my YouTube channel or on my website, bonnieoneil.com. So today I am with award-winning author Amy Julia Becker. And Amy Julia and I had the privilege of meeting each other a couple of years ago when she was the speaker at my church's women's retreat. We were down the shore. It was a lovely spring weekend, I think probably about almost a year to the day before the pandemic
Mhm.
uh, overwhelmed all of us. And because Amy Julia and I are both very good friends with the woman who organized this retreat, I had the privilege of having dinner at a small little table for, I don't know, six or eight of us one of the nights of this retreat, and just having a chance to get to know her a little bit and understand even more a little bit about her heart than I got to, obviously, as hearing her speak as the weekend went on. And so I think you're going to be delighted just by listening to our conversation today, because she's just such a wonderful person. So Amy Julia has written extensively about disability and her experience raising a child with Down syndrome. So her daughter Penny is 15 now, and she was diagnosed with Downs at the birth, not beforehand. So this was a surprise, which is unlike a lot of Down syndrome diagnoses. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Amy Julia writes and speaks about faith and family and disability and privilege. She is the author of 4 books, including A Good and Perfect Gift, Small Talk, and her most recent book, White Picket Fences: Turning Towards Love in a World Divided by Privilege. She is also the host of a podcast, Love is Stronger Than Fear, which you should check out. And she and her husband, as well as Penny, and 2 other children, a 12-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, all live in Western Connecticut. And so when she's not busy writing and speaking and raising her active family, she enjoys reading, running, hiking, and savoring long meals with small groups of people. So it is my delight to welcome you, Amy Julia, today. And thank you so much for being here. And I just really wanted to begin just by talking about what was it like to receive a diagnosis of Down syndrome at birth. You were young, she was your first baby. There was nothing out of the ordinary in the pregnancy. What was that like to receive that?
Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting going back 15 years to try to even fully remember it. And even when I was writing A Good and Perfect Gift, which was when Penny was, anywhere 3 or 4 years old, it still felt like an effort to get back into the set of emotions and thoughts that I had when I was first aware of that diagnosis. And the first experience, it was about 2 hours after she was born, was of shock. And
Mm,
I mean that I mean, probably even in clinical terms, in the sense that I didn't feel anything.
mm,
There was a blankness and an emptiness. So I had felt a ton of joy and peace and gratitude when Penny was born. And there was this sense of all of that getting sucked away, thankfully not in any permanent way, but that's in that moment. But it wasn't yet replaced by anything, it was just gone.
mm,
And over the course of the next couple of days, that I probably was still in a pretty numb place emotionally. I was trying to gather information, which is what my tendency is in the face of anything that I don't understand emotionally, is like, okay, let's try to learn about it. And we also, they immediately were taking Penny in for like an echocardiogram to see how her heart was. And what we learned was actually she was a healthy baby with Down syndrome. And that's part of probably why we didn't have a diagnosis before birth. Some of that was choices we had made about prenatal testing. But um, she really, although she was 5 pounds, I mean, she was teeny, she went home from the hospital 2 days into her life because she was
um,
doing well.
yeah.
Um, so we had an experience that a lot of parents who have a child with Down syndrome have, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a couple months in the NICU, and they have a lot of just initial true health concerns. And that's a totally different emotional experience than what we had, which was we have a healthy, beautiful baby who's sleeping well and eating well. I mean, she nursed really easily and well. So there were all these things physically that were great. And yet we had this emotional experience of coming to grips with the expectations we had brought into the hospital
Mhm.
without even knowing it before she was born. Um, and all of the fear and really ignorance that we had around Down syndrome, and really having to confront that in this bigger picture way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I can say about those early days.
Yeah, I know. I wrote in Chronic Hope that I felt when my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I felt like I had just entered a spinning tunnel, and I
Mm,
couldn't make my way through what was up, what was down, and it was so completely disorienting because I knew so much about the disease, and it was so personal
mm,
since my brother had died of it, and I had a sister with it. And
yeah.
so yeah, just this disorientation, and I absolutely can connect with that idea of feeling like it was shock, like just a complete shock.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you find yourself moving through that phase?
So what was also interesting was that my husband, he would say he plummeted to the kind of emotional bottom in a way he never has before or since.
Wow.
And that it was a darkness he's never experienced, but he only was there for a day. And
Interesting.
then he popped up to the surface and was like, I have a beautiful daughter. And I mean, and has like never gone back. It's just, whereas I don't think I ever got to that bottom, but it took me a lot longer to get to the surface too. It was like this stretched out experience for me of again, a lot of thinking, a lot. I wouldn't actually say a lot of praying in the beginning. There was a sense that I was almost too raw to even know what to say to God or how to do that. So but I did do a lot of journaling and was also just learning how to be a mom in general. I mean, it was this combination of having a new baby as well as having a new baby with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
But I will say that Penny, there is one of the reasons it's nice to have a prenatal diagnosis is that by the time often I've heard you give birth, you're very much at a place of like acceptance and are able to receive your child for who he or she is.
Yeah.
For me, though, having Penny in my arms as I was processing this news that she had Down syndrome, when she was out of the room, it was only scary. When she
Mm,
was in the room, that all melted away because here she is right now,
yeah.
and she's beautiful and she's content, and that was a something I was able to carry through that year and really through her life. That sense of um, not never thinking about the future, but when the fear of the future becomes overwhelming, returning to the present moment with her, and this can be true for other situations as well. Um, so for me, I think that year was really about a year. We Penny was born in December. She was baptized the following November, and that felt like a real public, I don't know, announcement
Mm,
of the
yeah.
joy of our daughter. And
Yeah.
I did feel like it was a journey for me to
Yeah.
get from one to the next, those 11 months, I guess it was. And it was a journey that involved both a lot of information and doctor's visits and poopy diapers and things like that, but also just for me, I guess I had to work through some emotional pain as far as I felt a lot of pain and guilt over the degree of um, fear and sorrow I had when I learned that she had Down syndrome.
Yeah.
um,
So
so
even after, like in that moment, realizing that you felt guilty for feeling
yes.
afraid or not happy about it. Let's talk about guilt for a minute, because I write, there's one of my whole chapters in Chronic Hope is called guilt. And we parental caregivers can put so much guilt on ourselves. And why do you think that is? And tell me about what your experience with it was.
Well, so I felt two layers of guilt. So one was this like, did I make this happen?
Mm,
Which is a somewhat irrational guilt with something like Down syndrome because it's very unexplained why Down syndrome happens. And um, I think that was a form of control. Like if it's my fault, then I will also be the one who's responsible for it and I'll take control and so there was that aspect of guilt. Then there was the guilt about my feelings
mm,
because how can I feel fear when I'm holding a beautiful baby? How can I feel sadness when. So what I often thought of that was it was like this process of grieving,
mm,
but it was an ugly grief because I
mhm,
was coming face to face with things inside me that I would rather have never seen. Although the beauty of doing that, right, is that if those things have actually died, well, then eventually, once they've left, there is some beauty and promise on the other side. So there were, I think, two different aspects of guilt for me, um, but there was a real grace and peace that came on the other side of acknowledging those fears
mhm,
and prejudices that I had against people with intellectual disabilities.
mhm,
Um, and then recognizing that I had been given a tremendous gift through
mm,
our daughter.
mm. I hear that again and again from people that I have these kinds of conversations with about how having a child with some sort of special needs or a chronic health condition has actually changed us. And as we pick up and acknowledge and notice the gifts along the way, that we're actually changed in the process. And has that been your observation as well?
Yeah, I certainly, I mean, again, I do think having kids in general does that on some of at a broad level.
Yeah.
My husband pretty early on said that having a child with Down syndrome was like parenting on steroids, where it was just like a magnified version of it. So it wasn't different in the sense that you don't get any of that with other kids, but it's just like even bigger.
Yeah.
And we did feel that way where, and I do continue to feel that way where am changed. I think the for the most part, speaking in broad terms, people with intellectual disabilities um, live in the world with less of a sense of pressure and achievement and individualism. And while Penny is very independent and very able and very smart and all these things, there's still a peacefulness to her spirit, and a willingness to ask for help. And she's able to laugh at herself in ways that I think is pretty unusual and always has been. I mean, she just doesn't get defensive in the same way that the rest of us do. And there is so all that is to say, I feel as though she has introduced me to a different way of being
Mm,
that honestly I think is closer to the heart of God than the hyper individualistic, achievement oriented, um, successful way I had been taught. Um, which is really a product of, I think, our country, but also being a white person in our country, being able bodied, having access to education, having a fair amount of affluence in my family, all of those things
yeah.
contributed to a sense of I have got to work really hard all the time in order to keep what I've got. Um, and
A lot of
that
pressure.
is the measure of my worth. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So that's interesting that you say then that Penny's life has influenced the life of everyone in your family and the way that your family lives. They can certainly on a daily basis observe her peacefulness, and that influences how everybody else in the family may or may not respond, because they certainly are seeing her as an example. And so you did go on to have two more children after Penny. And can you talk about any feelings of fear? Were you afraid for your any subsequent children that that they also might have Down syndrome, or even just something else? Like, because once that Pandora's box of the possibility of a chronic illness being there, once that's opened, how did that play out for you as you considered expanding your family?
So certainly that was also a part of that first year for me of Penny's life, was this fear about having more kids and a guilt about feeling that fear.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
back to the
yeah,
guilt theme.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I did get to a place with that where I just felt more really willing to receive another child with Down syndrome, because
mm,
again, although doctors and statisticians or whatever cannot say why,
mm,
I, as a young woman, I was 28 when Penny was born. Um, Nevertheless, as soon as I had a child with Down syndrome, my likelihood of having another child with Down syndrome
mm,
increased significantly. So it was as
mm,
if going into pregnancy when I was 30, I had the chance of a child with Down syndrome of a 40-year-old woman. And
wow,
then again with Mary, so there was, I really needed to say, okay, could I gratefully receive
mm,
whoever is given to me?
mm,
And that was, I think, much easier than I expected it to be. And again, I think we did not have the health concerns that a lot of people do early on in the life of a child with Down syndrome. We had, like, she needed tubes in her ears, she
yeah,
needed glasses, but they were not scary, life threatening.
yeah,
She did have a heart procedure, but again, it was not a life threatening open heart
mhm,
surgery, that type of
right,
thing.
right,
So, with all that said, we did a pretty minimal amount of prenatal testing for the next two kids as
mhm,
well. I did want to know whether their hearts had any problems that would require being in a specialized hospital when they were born.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
did not, and neither of
mm,
them had Down syndrome. But we didn't do like an amniocentesis or other testing that would have said definitively what's going on here, because we really wanted to have a posture with all of our kids, but also, really with ourselves and with other people, of like receiving who you are as you are given,
mhm,
rather than
yeah.
thinking ahead of time, I know who you're supposed to be, and I'm going to try to mold you into that.
Yeah, and that's a really hard thing for a parent of any child, but then especially
Absolutely.
when, a
Yeah.
chronic medical condition comes along. Yeah, exactly. I think I remember you writing in A Good and Perfect Gift about some early feelings of loneliness or isolation as a, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I read that in A Good and Perfect Gift. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of take us back to those days, and how did that feel for you
Mhm.
as a caregiver to feel like your family was different? What was that like for Amy Julia to feel like, my family's different from other families?
Yeah, that was another fear, was actually that we would be different. I don't even know at that point if I, like, early on, I don't know that I even felt that we were different. I was just afraid we would be. I
Mhm.
kind of had these almost movie images of walking into a restaurant and everyone turning and staring, or things like that. And I was very afraid of that experience of, I guess, social stigma.
Mhm.
Um, I did feel like, I remember this one moment where I was with some other young moms, my age, who had kids just the same age as Penny, and none of that, I knew the drive from Princeton, where we lived in New Jersey, to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I knew that drive by heart.
Yeah.
And I had this moment of being like, none of them
Mhm.
have ever even been there, much less could they drive it without a map.
Yeah.
And I could feel myself kind of sinking into pity
Mm.
of just, yeah, I'm all alone in this. I don't, and I did struggle with that sense of myself being alienated as a mom. It was really frequent that I would bring up something that I was struggling with, and someone would make a comparison.
Mm.
So, oh yeah, we've had that problem with,
Yeah,
Josie too. And I'm like, no, you haven't. I mean, it's just not the same.
yeah.
And I know you're trying to connect to me in this, but that actually makes me feel more alone,
Mhm.
because, I don't. I just remember somebody talking about how their kid wasn't good at math, and it's like,
Right.
right.
Right, right,
um,
exactly, exactly. I
it
I
just was
find that people are always looking to this level the playing field or to create a silver lining when all you want is for people to just sit with you, just
right.
hold
Yeah.
you for a moment, just hold the silence with you, like, "I know what you're going through is really hard, and I'm here for you." And instead, people try to massage it with words that just end up hurting more than helping.
Yeah, so that was I mean, I'm sure that still happens. I don't think I'm nearly as sensitive as I was
Mhm,
early on about it. But I did feel alone in those places. I did also pretty frequently quickly, and this was a gift as well, connect to other parents who had children with Down syndrome in our area.
mhm,
And so there was a sense of community of people who did understand,
yeah.
whether it's on like the practical level of, oh yeah, this is the eye doctor we see, or
Right, right.
on that more emotional level of, yeah, when our kids get together, most kids with Down syndrome don't walk until they're 2, maybe 3.
Okay, yeah,
And so, you know, and eventually they walk in the
yeah,
same way that anybody else does. But that year between 1 and 2, where all of my friends with typical kids, their kids are running and Penny can't go anywhere. Again, it just felt like, oh my gosh, we're so behind and we're so alone.
yeah,
And so it was lovely to get together with other moms who had kids with Down syndrome and sit the kids next to each other and they could play and we could talk and it
right.
didn't feel like I'm so different or she's so different. I was really grateful for that.
Yeah, I can't agree more. The community that I bonded with other families who had a child with type 1 diabetes, it was crucial. It was where I learned everything, and I felt the support that I needed, and they weren't so much interested in getting to know one another because they didn't the children, because they didn't necessarily feel that there was anything different about them, and
Right,
so why
right.
should I bond over the fact that I need to take an insulin shot? But, yeah, that's so how did you move past some of these feelings of whether it was guilt or fear or loneliness to a place of restored or perhaps new hope, probably not the same hope you had before, but a newer hope? How did you what were some of the things that you did that were helpful for you?
I do think a lot of that was a spiritual movement that happened in me, in terms of recognizing the ways in which I think I understood myself and humans more generally
Mm,
in a wrong way, like in a way that did not actually
mhm,
understand our belovedness as human beings
mhm,
as we are.
mhm,
And so what I saw, so initially I thought Penny was essentially more broken than I was.
mhm,
And what I came to see was, no, I am just as broken, I'm just as needy, I'm just as limited and vulnerable, and she is not simply a broken human being,
yeah,
nor am I.
yeah,
She's
yeah.
a beloved human being with gifts that have been given. I remember really early on, a friend of mine who is in ministry said to me, I can't wait to see the ministry that she will have.
I
And that,
remember reading that in your book.
yeah,
That
it was
was
the first
beautiful,
time because
powerful.
people said all the time
Yeah,
that she's going to change me, in the sense of like, I'm going to become more patient or I'm going to become more loving. But it wasn't the sense of she has gifts that she's going to give the world in and of herself. And so it was really a transformation of how I understand myself,
yeah,
that was what gave me hope, and really not just hope for her or for our family, but honestly, in a more broad way, for people. But
yeah,
and that
yeah.
that sense of what it means to be people who are created in the image of God with gifts that we have to offer.
Oh, and that's beautiful because I think it's so easy for us to think that, well, you have to have all the functioning body parts, and that makes you a whole person, and everybody else is broken, and we're going to help you along, and that's not the way it
Right.
is at all. And
Right.
that must have been so liberating and freeing for you to come to that place and to see her as God's beloved child just in the same way that you are.
Yeah. And honestly, I would say that, in understanding that about her, again, there was this understanding about myself.
Mm,
Uh, that belovedness was not something. I think for so long my identity had been constructed upon achievement,
Mhm.
even though I would have said that God loved me, and but it still was like, and let me prove it, and
Yep.
so to say no, like that beloved position, that's what comes first, and anything you do can come out of that,
Yeah.
instead of the doing is what tells you who you are. It's like who you are can tell you what you want to do, and there is a tremendous amount of freedom in that.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I have one final
Yeah.
question for you today, since we both like to write. I'm
Mm.
curious to know how the writing process has really helped you sort of go through some of these stages. I know you were keeping a journal at the time
Mhm.
when Penny was first born, but how has writing helped you sort of process and come to a place of deeper hope?
Yeah, so that, I mean, truly, my mother would come down when Penny was first born, and she would say to me, "I want you to either go take a nap or write in your journal." And so I did. I mean, I just filled journal pages, which really became the basis of A Good and Perfect Gift,
Mm,
and gave me access to that raw emotion from that first year.
yeah.
Um, I actually don't journal in quite the same way anymore, probably because of social media. Like that's on some level where my journaling goes. I mean, I do keep a journal, but I feel like a lot of those thoughts and feelings about life are still coming out, but they're coming out on Instagram. Um, and I do think for me, writing does allow me, it's like a way to get from my head to my heart. It's a
Mhm,
way to move from thinking to feeling,
mhm,
because I tend to start with thinking,
mhm.
and have a harder time accessing feelings. But the writing helps me to make that move, um, and to try to integrate all the different things that are going on in my head.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. And so, for anyone who's listening today, if you're feeling kind of stuck in any of those places of the emotional stress of raising a child with a complex chronic condition, maybe journaling might be something that you'd
Mhm.
want to try, just as a way of just kind of moving some of these thoughts around from that echo chamber in our heads, move it down into our hearts, and try to find some resolution there. So, well, I just want to thank you, Amy Julia, for being here with us today, and just discovering how you found hope and encouragement along your journey. If you want to find out more about Amy Julia and her books, her podcast, and her writing, you can find her on her website at amyjuliabecker.com. You can find her over at Instagram as well. And my new book, Chronic Hope, Raising a Child with Chronic Illness with Grace, Courage, and Love, is available now at Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and Books A Million. And for more information about me and all of my stuff, that's on my website, bonnieo'neill.com. So thanks for listening today. Take care of each other, and hope to see you again soon.